Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Best of Relationship Podcast 2016. Hope you enjoy.
This is about you. This isn't about how they feel about you, because a lot of times we figure out our life by the way other people respond to us. And, that's not necessarily independent. And I'm talking about how you feel. And there's so many variables. Because, see, here's the thing. If someone is throwing a lot of strong emotion at you, then sometimes you just feel compelled that you have to mirror that back. So your feelings can sometimes be overshadowed. And if you've experienced that, see, it's hard to know if you're feeling something because it's you or if that's just somebody's influence. I call that like peer pressure. And, there are a lot of relationships that start out like that. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you don't even know that you're experiencing something until somebody introduces it to you. So that's how some things begin. But when I'm talking about that love expression, that where you want to do something about this, where you want to be in charge of how this thing goes. See, that takes a while to develop, because as the chemistry in your body starts to transform, starts to tingle, starts to give you that itch that something else is going on, you have your life, your background, your experiences that are also a part of that. And you have all of these warning bells that are probably firing off. If love is new to you, then, and as it is with young people, then you might not even know what it is that you're experiencing. And sometimes we learn what we think love is because we interpret what movies tell us. We listen to song lyrics and we interpret what that is. But, collectively, all of these things impact, how our parents responded to love, what it is. And I'm talking about the romantic thing too. And all of that is part of that salad that's mixed in there. And you're trying to walk through this thing in life and figure out how it works. Well, how do you know? How long does it take to know if you love someone? Well, if you have experienced something in a way of a tingle and that first love, that thing happened right away. And it could even be infatuation. So I'll make that distinction. And infatuation has more to do with not so much loving someone as it is just this really chemical, emotional reaction to something that happens. And many of us have gotten caught up in that. And unrequited love has a lot of that kind of component to it. And unrequited love means that somebody doesn't love you back the way that you love them. And sometimes there may be no love. And there's, again, a lot of songs that have been written about the subject. You can key in the word unrequited love, and it's an amazing definition. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give it to you right here. In the simple version, unrequited love or one-sided love is love that's not openly reciprocated or understood as such by the beloved. The beloved may not be aware of the admirer's deep and strong romantic affection, or they may consciously reject it. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines unrequited as not reciprocated or returned in kind. Now, if you've experienced something like that a number of times, which can happen over and over in your life, you're really going to be at a mystery as to know if you love someone. And it takes a long time to process through those things. That could be months. But when, let's say you get into the experience with a person and you're trying out things, you're spending time together, you're doing things, you're enjoying the shared experiences, whether it's going out, going to movies, taking a trip somewhere. And, you sort of build on that experience as far as the time and the length of time that you spend. Because here's an interesting thought. Obviously, when you first meet somebody, you can't spend all day and all night with them because that's, you have lives. You have lives before you came together, before you even came to meeting this person. And, your life should continue to exist. You shouldn't just necessarily have to do a 180 to be with somebody, unless it's life altering. If you're going down into the dumps and you meet somebody and they have an impact on you, that's great. Hey, that might be a good person for you to be with. But you have a life. And as you begin to spend more and more time with that person, it could be an hour this day, it could be 2 hours on another day, and you're doing things in which are useful to both of you that are functioning. And then you begin to spend that personal time together where you become emotionally sort of dependent upon each other, and you start building that connection. That's a kind of love, but I'm not saying that that's the deep, I want to spend the rest of my life love with you. See, the thing about polyamory is the secrecy is not there. It's done with the understanding of both partners that you're seeking other companionship. So that obviously forces very important conversations about sexual health, about the emotional fidelity, all the kinds of things that make a monogamous relationship what it is, and that it's exclusive. Polyamory changes that. And as I can see, I gave you a few examples of things that are non-monogamous. It's become, I'm not going to say it's mainstream, but it's probably been practiced for many, many years. And as I've read a little more on that, it did express that. But it's becoming more talked about, so it's coming more to the surface. And because this is the relationship program, I'm going to discuss it with the idea of having an open conversation about it. And you may know somebody who's been in it. You may have read something in the press about it, and many of the listeners may have actually practiced it. And some people go to polyamory and then decide it doesn't work for them and then go back to monogamy. I can't say that there are pros and cons. I'm here to raise the conversation. But what I have come to understand more so as women themselves become more independent and have more choices and have more power in their lives to not only make the choices about where they want to go to school, where they want to live, who they want to have relationships with, and whether those relationships are exclusive. Because it has, in general, been understood that women didn't have the power to decide those things, because women have only had the right to vote since the 20th century. And since then, women have struggled to gain parity in the workplace, become bosses and equal pay, and be respected for the things that they hold dear. And it has been assumed that men were the power brokers and got to decide things. Now, when it comes to relationships, obviously there's two partners, at least in a monogamous relationship, the man and woman. And for that, the balance of power has oftentimes been one of those emotional struggles, because you do have that tug of war, who's in control. You get a lot of passive aggressive kinds of things. Well, the polyamory thing, in terms of this, it tends to blow the doors on that, because the discussions have to be had, and it encourages it. If you do any research on this, it really is incumbent upon you to know something about yourself and to be able to ask the questions. And certain people are not going to be comfortable with you or your partner having someone else, another person as a confidant, or having other relationships. It just is very unsettling for a lot of people.
This has been the Golden State Media Concepts Best of 2016 Relationships. Thank you for listening, and please stick around.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
As we come into our being, we have learned to be dependent, and that has a lot of benefits. It means somebody else is responsible, but when you're doing the self-love thing, you've sort of transitioned to a space in life where you're taking care of your own responsibilities, and with it, you've had your life's experiences, and as you bounce back and forth through those kinds of things, it has an impact on you. And if you have been neglectful of yourself, and you find that there's some sort of loss that you're dealing with in life, then it's kind of incumbent upon you to figure out how to take care of yourself. That's kind of where the self-love thing comes in. And oftentimes it happens to us when we've suffered a loss. Let's say we've been somewhere, hung around some friends, somebody borrowed too much money, we don't get our money back, we start feeling guilty about asking for what they borrowed. And you start coming up with these deficits, and it's how do we fill our own cup as opposed to always filling someone else's. Now, there's that altruistic thing about you like to help other people. There's the thing about being kind to your neighbors and so on and so forth. But what happens in these experiences is we often have ourselves unfulfilled, and we have our own needs that are left to be met. And it's about taking care of oneself. So that's sort of an overview about self-love. But some of the ways that we get derailed, guilt is a big one. When you're raised to be thoughtful about others and to put others' needs first, and caretakers definitely understand this concept, then you feel very torn about putting your own self first. In fact, to even say that might even have a twinge of there's something wrong with it. And anyone can tell you that we all have needs. In experiencing that moment when you have a need yourself, but you don't feel good about taking care of yourself, because you can always find something else to put your time and attention to. And the guilt, that string on the guitar that's guilty, tends to always be playing in the back of your mind. And again, caretakers understand this intimately, because they're always in the mindset of there's somebody else's needs ahead of my own. But again, the caretaking role is you have to find that in yourself to take care of yourself. Because it turns out that the bottom line is if you don't take care of yourself, then you really ultimately can't take care of anyone else. And that sounds very philosophical, but what it takes into account is the human experience. If you are sick, you probably cannot, and I mean really sick. You're down in a bed, you can't get up, you can barely get down a glass of water or hold down any food. You can't take care of anyone else. I mean, if you're a caretaker and you're listening to this, you've been in that spot where you've been so down and out that you cannot even manage to take care of yourself. Now, you may be inspired to get up because you have responsibilities, but the thought of taking care of yourself should be paramount, because it's in these kinds of experiences when you may find yourself alone, wondering what is it that you're supposed to do. And it's in turning this information, all of this broad knowledge you have about being a caretaker, and then employing it for your own self-good, whether it means calling the doctor for yourself, calling for a ride if you need to go to the grocery store to get medication, all of these kinds of things. And I have been in that role myself, so I can speak from experience. but one of which, when I've talked to other people that have had this in and of themselves, one of the things that seems to happen is the reason they don't take care of themselves is because they feel guilty. And obviously guilt plays a big role in this. If you feel bad about taking care of yourself because there is something else that needs to that you feel emotionally that needs to be done, then it's how do we rewire that? How do we cross that threshold into making yourself a priority? Because the thing that I don't want to see for you as an individual is to get used and to be so run down that your health is in crisis. And quite often, that is what happens. Well, hello, and welcome to episode 25 of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. And the topic in general is, do you communicate? And something that I'm going to swing into is I'm going to talk about sexuality. That is a big piece of communication between a couple. Why? It's because when you're having sex, it's not a problem. When you're not having sex, it becomes a problem. And communication is a big part of why you will or will not have sex. I can guarantee it. It's one of those things that if you're not communicating, then sex tends to be something you desire, but you're going to have to figure out a way to get through the breakdown of communication. And when the communication is great, sex seems fun. It seems like it's very doable. And there's a lot of things that can derail the communication. But the sex in and of itself, why is it important? Because what it signals is it signals vulnerability to your partner and welcomeness and acceptance. And if you can imagine the mindset to be sexual with your partner, the mindset that you have to be in, because again, there was a give and take nature to the sexual component of a relationship, as it would be for any couple. And what applies here is the mindset that sex is pleasurable, and being able to have that with your partner, the pleasurable experiences, it's wonderful. It's a great feeling. And I hope any and everyone can experience that in their lives. But it requires you of investing yourself. And that's where the vulnerability comes in. And sex is definitely something that taps into your vulnerability bone. When you can't be vulnerable, then sex can be very, very difficult to achieve, because then what you possibly are doing is you're putting it upon your partner to read your mind, and that is not a place that I would want to be. We've talked about mind reading in other podcasts, so I'm not going to necessarily go off on that tangent, but I'm talking about sex and why people want it. It's because it feels good, and in this part about you communicating has to do with sharing the vulnerability, wanting that for your partner, pleasing your partner, and having that. And if you're not, then it's about, okay, figuring out what we can do. Now, in the last segment, I talked about communication and, social media and how that impacts it, and how when you can do it face to face, you seem to be able to convey your feelings, how you can work a room, and how you can be much more convincing. And I think this is an aspect that, wouldn't you be motivated if you thought you could experience some sexual pleasure? I think you would. So being vulnerable and communicating your feelings, being present. Oh, and that's another wonderful thing about sexuality, being able to have that experience, being present with your partner. And, it's intimacy, and it's something that you and your partner have. The other parts, as far as what we can do, is you need to ask your partner what they're feeling, what it is that they want. Again, that's part of the vulnerability. And by opening that conversation, then you get to share what it is that you want and how you're feeling. And it's amazing about how well these experiences will feel when you've had a good pleasurable sex. People that aren't having that in their relationship, and it is not exclusive, but I'm saying that people that don't have necessarily a good sexual experience, there is tension in that relationship. I heard an interesting story, and I don't know how true it is, but I'm just going to communicate this to you. And it was a study that was created. I can't validate the study because I don't have it in front of me, but I just remember hearing it, that in the first 3 months of a relationship, people have the most sex when they've decided to become sexually active than at any other time in their relationship. So what I think the statistic was trying to point out was that when people begin being sexual in their relationship, that the first 3 months, it happens a lot. And then after the people have been together for a while, then it sort of dwindles down into this other number that just seems to not really match the desire. And it's at that point in time, it's about compatibility. It's about making time for it and so on and so forth. So communicating your need. But I'm suggesting, hey, you can beat the average, whatever that conversation was. You can have a lot more physical intimacy with your partner by thinking about these kinds of things, communicating, talk to your partner about what they want and doing those kinds of things, spending that kind of quality time. And, I know with busy people, it's difficult to sometimes make that happen, but it becomes one of those things of actually planning it. And for those people who like to be spontaneous, it certainly probably throws cold water on that spontaneity thing because you like to do it whenever and whatever. But if you're not having it at all, scheduling it seems to be the best thing that you can do. Now, there are some people that are wonderful about making schedules, and think about that. Put that in your planner. When you've become very busy in your life and you're scheduling other things like doctor's appointments that's an example of something you got to schedule. Boy, does that cost you if you don't make the appointment. They cancel you or you get canceled and have to pay a fee if you don't make it. So schedule time for your sex. It's also about communicating with your partner and letting them know how important they are. Bring the conversation to the table. That's one that I think some people, because of the vulnerability aspect of it, people feel, I know oftentimes partners feel like they're going to be rejected. I know that women often feel that, if a man wants it, he'll approach her and that he should be the aggressor. That's very understood. I know there's a lot of that in our culture. But I think gender roles are shifting and that women have as much opportunity to ask and be vulnerable about asking as men do. Like I say, I've talked about it, that these gender roles are changing. And as they shift, we oftentimes find ourselves kind of confused as to what it is we want to do and how to ask and is it appropriate. So we're just going to have to try. It's going to have to be a trial and error. You're going to have to experiment with it and see where you fall. And if you happen to make a mistake with someone, then just own up to it and say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. Let's try to start over. Let's approach this from a different direction. And I think most people would be sensitive and understanding about that. And if they're not, then it's probably not somebody you want to be with. Move on. Find somebody who's more your speed or your temperament. So there's always an opportunity to do that. Another thing about sex, make it fun, make it interesting. And the thing is, don't have sex be a chore. That's the one thing that's going to take the life out of a sexual experience, is making it seem like it's a chore, because remember, we're in a really vulnerable space when this is what you're doing. And your partner is obviously going to be reading you for signals as to whether this is okay, whether that's okay. And when that part about it seeming like it's drudgery happens, that is like having a conversation stopper. I mean, things can stop right in the middle, and how awkward and embarrassing that's going to be. And if you're one of these individuals that's experienced that, now you've got to do some damage control.
This has been the Golden State Media Concepts Best of Relationships 2016. Stay tuned for more relationship goodness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch, whatever it may be.
Hey, have you ever had a situation where there's somebody that you're attracted to, but you just have a lot of anxiety about wanting to talk to that person, kind of making your feelings known? And you ever wonder what that's about? Well, one of the things that I can share with you is when the stakes are really high, I think all of our anxiety, our fear of failure steps in. We can remember maybe not just remembering the image in our head, but we can remember the feeling of approaching someone or something that we wanted and failed at it. I mean, if you can imagine what it's like to have something that you want, like say you want to have a conversation with someone, like you say, here was the attractive person, and you're imagining this dream date, this possibility of your life changing in terms of a relationship. So everything is on the line. You have to engage that person. You have to get them involved. And, I think there's that fear of rejection. So that's underneath it all. But what I want to do is I'm going to give you a little confidence builder here. I'm going to tell you something and this is something as a guy, I've heard this from attractive women. They say a lot of them are very lonely. And women who are listening to this understand that from the guy's perspective, guys are afraid of being rejected. But for the guys that may be listening to this podcast, here's the thing. There are a lot of very attractive women, and a lot of them are very lonely, if because they've heard the same old pickup line, that's very cliche, and it's just tired. And women, they've either talked about it, they've heard about it, read about it, something, and it's just something that just throws them off. And even if the guy is a little awkward, they say they would much rather have him be authentic and be original than to use some old tired pickup line that just really doesn't represent who he is. Because I think what women are always leery of is some guys is just going to show up out of the woodwork and then try to use them. And women have a reason to be cautious. Now, women don't have to be necessarily so needy because they don't have to depend on a guy to take care of them. Although they may love the affection and the attention, they don't necessarily need a guy to take care of them the way they used to. So they don't have to pretend. But, again, I'm saying that to the guys, to the listening audience. So, yeah, when you add that to the mix, yeah, it even raises the stakes more. But being authentic is what's going to get their attention. I'll say it again. Being authentic, that means being yourself is what's going to get their attention. Because being anyone else, it won't work, because it won't match, because a person will decide what they like based on what they see and how you behave. And you want to be able to do that, be who you are all the time. Now, it may turn out that who you might be interested in, it may not work out, but trying to do it from the place of being a fraud, by the place of being someone else, not being yourself, isn't going to work either. Because when the real you shows up, it's either going to make it or not. And it's easier being the real you. So if you're a bit klutzy, then, again, be you are, because that could be endearing. Because for the most part, women appreciate a guy that's sincere. Now, to the women who are listening to this podcast, I think hopefully I've not spoken out of turn, because, again, I've talked to women about that. And so I'm not just making that up. But what I want to share is, from the guy's point of view, there is, and I'm not saying it's fair, but there is the perception that really attractive women are screwed up in the head, that they want things that they can have that they're looking to trade up, and that frustrates a guy. So what a guy is more tempted to do is to pretend to be somebody he's not in order to get you, maybe to bed you, and then figure out if there's some other way that he can keep you long enough to where then you'll become dependent upon him. And I know that sounds twisted and just not nice, but that's what's going on in guys' heads, because I've talked to them. Again, guys think really attractive women are attractive, but the perception is that they have been told that they're good looking so much of their life that when a guy approaches them, and if he's not as very good looking, that she's not going to want to be with me because I'm not that great looking of a guy. And I think it's really incumbent upon women to communicate what their need is. So this actually may be a bit of a twist on this. The women might have to take the lead in some of these conversations. And I know it's a bit different. I know they want men to be the aggressor, men to be the chaser. They will continue to be that. But it's about changing the perception that really attractive women are just screwed up in the head. And now I know from some of the women that I've talked to that they've really been through the crapper. They've been with guys who have been jocks. They have been all about getting the sex, getting laid, and not being very mature in how they behave. And it's definitely screwed up a lot of people. But that's also to say that those are individuals that have done things. And to not wash their whole the whole male species because you've had relationships with guys who have been jerks. What we find is that sometimes it's a matter of picking a different kind of guy. Oftentimes people are attracted to the same kind of individual. They keep going to that kind of individual who, if the track record is there, maybe you need to pick a different kind of guy. And I know, again, we should be judging people on their individual characteristics, but you got to learn to ask better questions about individuals and wait for the answer, wait for the response. Because let your life matter. Let the experiences that you've had teach you to ask better questions. And I mean that on both sides of the coin. And guys, don't assume that a woman isn't interested in you because you're not as good looking as somebody else. Again, if you're being sincere, they can look past that, and vice versa. I think it's also to say to guys that when you're attracted, who you want to be attracted to, it's not always about how good looking they are per se. When you think in your head, what are you attracted to? I think you really need to be dealing with the personality types. So I'm trying to make sure that goes for both men and women. It's not just one way. It's not just saying attractive women are screwed up and that guys, you have to be on the lookout. It's guys, don't always assume that women are screwed up. Sometimes it's maybe you're screwed up as a guy and you need to change your thinking about how you approach women. And be sincere, be a gentleman. And I think we all know what that is. If you don't know what it is, Google it. Google gentleman. Read it up. Read up on it and then figure out what it is that you can do to be responsible, to talk to women in a way that's respectful of who they are. And also it's a reflection on you.
This has been the Golden State Media Concepts Best of Relationships 2016. If you like what you heard, you can find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, and GoldenStateMediaConcepts.com. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.